Hello and good day to you all. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all of our audience members, wherever you're watching from today. And welcome to the Africa Football Business Show, brought to you by the Football Foundation for Africa. My name is Dev Kumar Palmer. I'm going to be sitting as your host today. And today we're going to be discussing issues in African football, particularly in relation to football agents. Now, before we proceed and make the introductions to our esteemed guests, a very quick shout out to all of the partners of the Football Foundation for Africa. That includes OTB Africa, Palmers, C Beyond Leadership Forum, and iSport Learn. Now, as I mentioned already, today is focused on football agents and some of the legal issues that arise in African football from this sector specifically. Now, this is a hugely controversial topic around the whole world, and none less in Africa. And it's also one that generates, I'm sure you would agree, a huge amount of interest every time it's discussed, and for good reason. Now, in order to unpick some of the issues in the sector today that arise at both a continental level and an international level, I'm honored to be joined by Farai Razano and Luis Villas-Boas Pires. A very brief introduction on both of these gentlemen for the audience today. Farai Razano is a sports lawyer based in South Africa, the leader and the founder of Razano Attorneys. Farai is an attorney that specializes in sports and entertainment law, and he's active for and advised a diverse range of clients in these fields. He serves as a prosecutor for Boxing South Africa, sits on the FIFA Pro Bono Council, and is also an editorial board member for Law in Sport in the African subdivision. In the past, he's also worked as a prosecutor for the South African Institute of Drug-Free Sport. So, Farai, welcome to the show today. It's great to have you back. I would love to be able to call you now, I think, a frequent attendee and collaborator on the show. So thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you, Dev. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Farai. And then we've also got Luis Villas-Boas Pires. Luis is the head of agents at FIFA. So we at the Football Foundation for Africa are absolutely honored to have FIFA representation on the panel today. Luis is a Portuguese qualified lawyer with nearly 2 decades of experience in different areas of law across corporate law, commercial law, and sports law, having practiced in both Lisbon and London. He's a graduate from Universidade Católica Portuguesa, and is also a graduate of the FIFA Master in International Management Law and Humanities. So, Luis, again, it's an absolute honor to have you here today. Thank you for making the time, and I do hope that we'll be able to get a great discussion amongst ourselves, myself, yourself, Farai, and of course all of the audience who are here with us today, who will no doubt be firing questions at both of you on the panel. Thank you very much, Luis.
Thank you, Dev, for the invitations. I'm super happy and excited to be here and to discuss this hot topic.
Well, you said it appropriately. It's a very hot topic, and I think the one thing I would highlight, and I hope that you both agree, and I hope that the audience also agree, that it is a topic that has raised much conjecture over the past years, particularly the past 6 years, where we've had the regulations of working with intermediaries in force from the 1st of April 2015. Now, for the sake of time and also for facilitating probative discussions, the emphasis in this session will be discussing briefly the status quo, but also trying to pivot towards the positive next steps that can be deployed and implemented by all of us within the sector today, as opposed to simply engaging in an endless post-mortem of what has happened in the past. This is something that has been discussed by many panels and webinars previously. So I'm mindful to ensure that we don't repeat this in the future. If you guys can hear any noise in the background, that is indeed my dog. And I'm sure, much like the audience members we have today, she is also very passionate about the area. So I apologize if she gets a bit too excited, but I'm sure she's got a few questions to pose, just like you do as well. Now, both gentlemen have extreme experience within this area. They've got legal competence in relation to agents. And this is an overtly practical sector, which often forsakes the letter of the law and the regulation itself, sometimes unintentionally and other times with premeditation. Now, the challenges that surround this area, this huge sprawling sector, covers over 200 member associations around the world. Now, FIFA was hugely criticized in 2015 when it did bring forward the regulations on working with intermediaries. However, many people around the world feel that the issue with this is that many of the critics are often the first to fire in this instance, yet tend to do so without providing solutions. So I'm hoping that fast forwarding 6 years, we can try and find some solutions at the end of this discussion. So let's get straight into it. Now, Farai, we've discussed previously, and I've had a great discussion with you in this sense that the adage of deregulation is something that is often a misnomer in reality, because FIFA wasn't the only party around the world regulating this activity, because invariably there are each state jurisdiction has its own laws and legislation to be able to manage this kind of activity within its own jurisdiction. So with regards to talking about deregulation as such, it's something that we can, I hope, move forward from very quickly. But there are a number of challenges facing agents operating in Africa, with a number of agents operating on the continent with differing degrees of success, let's say. If you wouldn't mind, Farai, getting us started, what's your current perspective on the manner in which the agent system works across Africa today? Farai, forgive me, it seems that you're muted.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thanks for pointing out. I think you hit the nail on the head with regards to deregulation and so forth, which was a buzzword at some time, but I've always perceived that as a misnomer, because in each and every jurisdiction or state, laws always apply, and so there was never, to put it in a phrase I think you used in one of our discussions, a wild west kind of thing. There's always been regulation, and this from national laws or state laws. So when you look at the agency, especially football agency across the continent, and especially the countries I've done work in, perhaps the best way to always start is what you have pointed out, national laws, that you need to understand that there are bare minimums that always apply anyway, and people need to understand what those bare minimums are, both from the players' agent's perspective and also from the player's perspective, because once we understand those principles or those basic principles, we can then be in a position to assess whether something is working as well as it should be, or it's not working as well as it should be, and identify the problems. And in my experience, the biggest challenge has been that confusion about what the law is or the regulations are, and the obligations or duties of either party to this relationship, because one has to remember that in that relationship there is the master or the principal, and then there's the agent who's supposed to be the servant. But that line is always blurred in practice, because sometimes the agent is driving the process more than the player himself. And sometimes you have issues where you are told a player wanted to join club A, but because the agent is perceived to be one that favors Club B, the player was forced to go to Club B. They never enjoyed game time and all those things. And I think all that arises from this lack of a proper understanding of the laws, and in this case, the regulatory framework within the football framework. And it's always important that we remind each other, whichever side of the spectrum you are, that there are those basic principles that apply. So I know this is beyond the scope of this discussion, but people need not lose focus on issues like, agents must act in accordance with their appointments or their mandates. They mustn't exceed their authority. They must always obey instructions from the principal. They must do so with due skill and care. They must avoid conflicts of interest. Then there's another hot topic of secret profits, which follows straight from this conflict of interest. And then there's also an issue of proper accounting. And these are some of the practical issues that at least I've experienced here on the African continent, where I have had a matter that relates to one of the lists that I've outlined, where a player comes and says, I didn't want to join Club B, my agent said. I hear my agent got money from the club, but he also deducted money from my side for procurement. I hear my agent, when I ask for an account of where we are in terms of the money that was paid in respect of whether it's image rights fees or whatever appearance fees, my agent keeps ducking and diving. And I, in my view, you can sum it into a lack of understanding of those basic principles. And Louis obviously will touch more on the specific regulatory framework in terms of the FIFA regulations. But I think as a kickstart to the discussion, these are important aspects that we need to highlight.
Well, thank you very much, Farai. And to slightly pivot before I move on to Luis and inviting his view, you mentioned some of the bits of misinformation, some of the ideologies, and almost the reversing of the relationship with regards to who is the servant and who is the master in terms of the commercial perspective. There's also, and I think you'll agree, there's also a lot of misleading branding, because the old adage of the FIFA agent is a tag which is still being bandied around quite a lot on the African continent as well. When, of course, we won't go into massive detail about it, but Luis, I'm sure, has heard this term many, many times. A term which has been defunct since the 1st of April 2015, but still seems to be appearing on a number of player representation contracts around the world. So there are so many little issues that need to be dealt with, and all of these things cumulatively bring about, as you rightly pointed out, a complete disparity with regards to how the system and the sector should be working on the continent. But no, thank you very much for that kickoff. But with that kickoff, and just moving on to yourself, Luis, Farai has just very, very helpfully pointed out a number of issues that are raised. And looking at it from a wider perspective, the agency sector itself tends to get a lot of bad press. Now, you are not an agent. You're not representing an agency. You're here as a representative of FIFA, who will be putting out, I hope, soon enough, a new set of regulations to support this sector. Would you say, in your opinion, Luis, that the growth of the football agency profession has resulted in better opportunities for professional football players, or do you have a specific view on how this sector is developed and which direction it should go in?
Thank you, Dev. Before answering to your specific question, I think Farai basically summarized, I would say, the general principles of common law regarding the agency, the fiduciary duty, the duty of loyalty, accounting, everything. So I think I agree. Every state has its own regulations that needs to be complied with by any agent that operates in that jurisdiction. And I think those principles also will be reflected in the future FIFA football agent regulation. So in that sense, I think we, of course, gather what's the best practice in different jurisdictions to try to put it like the general principles apply to an agency relationship between a client and an agent. And indeed, in that relationship, the client is the one that the agent should obey and should basically fulfill whatever the client says to do so. But going back to your question, it's true. I'm not sure if this is help to grow more opportunities to the sector. Indeed, that was one of the criticisms that, with based on our research, but also consulting with different football stakeholders, and even the agents themselves, that saw that the increase of the number of intermediaries led also to a decrease of the professional standard. So probably, yes, it might grow some opportunities, but to whom? To the football agents? Maybe. To the intermediaries? Definitely. Whether to the clients themselves? I have doubts, because not the fact that you have more intermediaries that will give you a better service. Probably you have more options to choose what agents better fits your needs. But I'm not sure if that will create better opportunities to clients. Indeed, creates an open market, but I felt like that was one of the issues that FIFA and their stakeholders, and including some agents, that they felt that that growing and open the market led to a decrease of the professional standards of the agency market. In that sense, that's why we also reintroducing this mandatory licensing system, as you all know. So we're going back to having the exam, but not only the exam, then the idea is also to have a continued professional development, so that the agents that are still licensed, they keep the license, but they need to be trained accordingly. And rightly said, it opened the market, but at the same time decreased that professional standards. And that's our objective in our regulations, is to raise those ethical and professional standards for the occupation of agents, not only to protect the agents, to protect the clients, mainly players who have short careers, but also to protect the contract stability and solidarity. I would say that probably will be the main objective for our regulations.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Luis. And it's great to hear that from the perspective of the regulator. And of course, and this is without trying to cause any tension between the two presenters we've got over here, but generally we have the perspective of the regulator, and then sometimes there are differences with regards to the experiences of those individuals that have, let's say, their boots on the ground. So if I may, Farai, I'd invite you just to piggyback off of Luis's answer. Would you agree in principle with Luis's perspective, or would you say that there is a fundamental difference of the growth of opportunities for professionals on the African continent? You're muted again, unfortunately, Farai.
Sorry, I'm going to keep it on and not switch it off. I keep forgetting. Yeah, so I was saying I agree with Louis to a large degree, except that I think we may come to the same conclusion, but the route we take to get there might be different, in the sense that with the strict regulation, I will not call it deregulation, because there was never such a thing, but with the strict regulation that was there, they may to a degree have been, the barrier to entry could have been slightly higher. So what would happen is the guys that couldn't cross that barrier basically chose to operate underground. So people started calling themselves business managers instead of football agents, and efforts by some people and myself included, when you want players that a certain club doesn't approve dealing with unlicensed agents, and you'd be told, no, but mine is a business manager. And FIFA or the regulators would not be interested in those people because they are not within their pool or their jurisdiction. They don't regulate business managers. But when there was this slight opening up, you then had these characters that were operating in the sidelines. Now they don't have to pass the exam. They just pay a fee. They get registered. And now they are in the open. And to a degree, that exercise, whether FIFA views it as not having achieved the intended results, helped a lot, because then these things were unearthed. At least these practices that were being done by people claiming to be business agents came to the fore. We now knew Farai masquerades as a FIFA football intermediary. This is what he does. It's against the principles. And the regulators were able to, as they are doing now, look into these practices and try and regulate them. So, but to come back to the issue of opportunities, I'm not so sure that it opened up better opportunities, especially for footballers, because with this opening up that happened previously, where there was only Farai, Dev, and Louis, the chances of being exposed amongst the three of us were 33.3, I think, percent. So you would be a bit more circumspect. But once there are hundreds of us, the chances of being exposed are now very slim, because it's 1 in 100. So what has happened is all sorts of practices have flourished during that period, because people can easily hide certain practices because there's a huge magnitude of other things going on or other people doing certain things. And that results in as we go on, we'll elaborate on these things, that largely what I would term exploitation really of the footballers, rather than getting better opportunities. And I think we'll touch on these things where youngsters are promised heaven and earth. Heaven on earth, will go to certain countries and you play, and they're even charged fees and so forth. And do you say that is a better opportunity for the footballer when in the end it doesn't materialize? I don't think we could ever say that. So perhaps on the one hand, it may have resulted in better opportunities for the intermediaries or agents, because then they could carry on with less regulation.
No, I think Farai, what you've highlighted there is there's so many different things that we can talk about, and in fact, the session that's been delivered to us by our good friend Mr. Vasala at the Football Foundation for Africa doesn't permit us enough time to actually cover every single thing here, unfortunately. But we will talk about the issue with rogue agents. I think that's certainly something that we need to go into, and I think that might be a good point right now to move straight into Luis's perspective, if I may. Farai has touched upon this and spoken about. You both spoke about the opportunities for intermediaries and agents having been increased. Now, the advent of money is something that leads to scavengers in any sector, not only in the football agent sector. So how effectively do you feel that the new regulations proposed by FIFA, or any set of regulations proposed by FIFA, could manage issues such as player trafficking, which is something that would be a natural consequence of a lot of rogue agents operating underneath the current, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Dev. I think in that sense, on the exploitation or the trafficking of football players is something that, first thing, it's a criminal activity. So it's not just a matter of football regulations. It goes beyond that. of course, FIFA is always open to cooperate with authorities, which will be basically the main objective. So because we're not an enforcement authority to go and chase those mainly that usually act as a fake football agent or a fake intermediary most of the time. But it also happens that sometimes they are also intermediaries for some reason. So I would say that I think like I said, there might be three ways of acting upon those situations. The first, like I said, cooperation with law enforcement authorities and other entities that act on that sense to see if there's any football agent involved or intermediaries involved in that criminal activity, so that we also can act upon. And which leads to the second point, which is to act more on the enforcement side of things. Like Farai just said, intermediaries open the regulation 2015 operate the market, but at the same time there's still rules it needs to apply, but the rules are there, but no one enforce them. So at the end, I think that's the biggest challenge also, not only for FIFA, but for also the member associations. They need to approve their own national football regulations to enforce their own regulations, because otherwise might as well not having if we don't enforce them. So again, along with the cooperation authorities, is also on the enforcement side, the investigation, sanction when the football agent breaches the football agent regulations or any were involved in any criminal activity. So on the other hand, the last, I would say, way of acting on this type of situations is on the preventive side of things. So trying to educate agents, try to educate players, parents also, officials, to understand what is the topic about, how can they act upon, how if they are approached by someone that basically says is intermediary, what should the answer, what they should do, whether they should confirm it's really a football agent. And to do that, we also have this, like I said in my previous intervention, the continuing professional development. To give an example, we part of this continuing professional development, which basically will be an e-learning platform where the football agents can access to, and taking some courses. We are now developing a course on anti-trafficking awareness with Mission 89 and with Larina, and I thank Larina for accepting this challenge to create this course, to mainly at the moment to football agents, more on the safeguarding of youth players. Our idea is also to create a handbook to be spread worldwide to try to educate the players, especially young players, the parents, and so on. And in the regulations, we'll have a specific course on minors. So if someone wants to represent minors in a specific transaction, they need to pass this course, where we also preparing with Labor University with Dr. Serhat. So, like I said, there are three ways: cooperation with authorities, acting on the enforcement side, and also on the preventive side of this issue, which we need to tackle, and we'll be active in that sense.
Well, that's brilliant, Luis. And CPD is something that I've had the opportunity to sit down and discuss with people on a number of panels before with regards to the agency sector. So I'm glad that FIFA is looking at doing this, and I'm sure this is something that we're going to cover a little bit more in detail towards the end of this session. But if we do just take a slight step back, Luis, and you were mentioning with regards to the regulations, of course, you, from a FIFA perspective, also deal with external authorities, because FIFA itself is not necessarily an enforcement body for this kind of activity. Invariably, FIFA has enforcement abilities for disciplinary matters and some commercial matters, but not necessarily for the agent side. However, when we look at the regulations themselves, we have the presence of rogue agents or fake agents, or however we wish to term them, all around the world, and Africa, of course, is no exception. In your view, Luis, how much of a balance in the favor of protection and integrity must any new set of regulations have, taking into account that certain activities like trafficking do have peripheral protections, as you've just referred to? I mean, what sort of balance would FIFA be looking at when we put the new regulations forward? Is it going to be quite heavily addressing all of these activities, or do you try to step away and let the individual jurisdictions have as much room as possible to maintain their activities, with FIFA simply being a supplementary body alongside?
So the idea, it will be what is proposed in the regulation is that FIFA basically enforce the FIFA football agent regulations, meaning everything that has an impact worldwide. So if there's a conduct that happens in one jurisdiction, FIFA won't be the competent body to enforce that regulation. That's why each member association needs to implement their own national football regulation, which at the end they still can be stricter, only if they wish to be stricter than our regulations, whether based by their own national law or by their own way of wanting to regulate football agents. So at the end, of course, we definitely cooperate with the member association, but the objective is mainly to focus in international transfers. And of course, usually anti-trafficking it's usually related to international transfers in that sense. Whether we need also to not to forget the Article 19 on minors of the RSTP, which is one of the points that are being discussed at the moment within the task force, to be changed or not. Then we'll see. Hopefully, till the end of the year, we'll see. But that Article 19 already gives you the background when FIFA can act upon, and I would say the football agent services will be also related to that, because that already limits significantly the international transfer of young players.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luis. What I'll do is I'll invite Farai to come in now. By the way, Farai, Luis, maybe you've seen, and also for all of the other members of the audience that we've got from around the world, we've got a shed load of questions coming in from all of the platforms, Facebook, YouTube. Keep those questions coming in, and we're going to do our absolute best to try and cover as much of this as we possibly can. In fact, I can see a question or two questions here from Jabal, and I think we're going to try and go on to that very shortly. But pivoting very slightly and touching upon Jabal's question in from a certain perspective, Farai, from your view, in your experience working in several African jurisdictions, there are many agents that operate in the market, both Pan-Africa and of course within individual countries. However, there's a comparative lack of, let's say, full-time agents in parenthesis, or professional agencies, as is often found in Europe or South America or elsewhere. Now, the business tends to be dominated by those operating outside of Africa, who then apparently dip into the continent. So in this sense, how would you say local agents can better prepare and upskill themselves? And I think this will now lead on to Jabu's question, which then deals directly with a cap on the commercial benefit that one can gain, which Farai, maybe you'd want to touch upon, and also Luis, I'm sure you'd have your own view on as well. So Farai, if I could start with you, what do you think the agents on ground can do to better upskill themselves in order to ensure that the entire ecosystem is further improved, and we don't have random individual intermediaries just making a quick buck off of a player, and we actually build it up into a sustainable business across the continent?
Thanks, Dave. I think so. One of the key issues that arises, especially from the Louis' discussion, is that there's no doubt the bad apples are much more than the good apples, and in almost every jurisdiction I've done work, there are some well-established agents and that have a proper professional setup. You do know where their office is. You do know where their phone numbers and all that. Clients go and meet there and conclude deals there. It's not always from the boot of somebody's car, or nowadays there's Uber. Those that don't have a car still do deals in a car. So there are well-established and full-time agencies that operate, but they are outnumbered by the many that could be classified as rogue, and in some instances, whether that's intentional or just a lack of an understanding of how they should operate or run their businesses, that's a different question. So what I say here is not directed at those full-time proper agents that are operational and which we appreciate. What I say here is much more directed to those rogue or unestablished ones. And part of the problem is that there's this notion that everyone thinks you can just be a football agent. You know, and when the exams were taken away and certain countries, some countries stuck with the exam, some just basically pay whatever amount of money, you become an agent. And everyone thought, you can just be a football agent. Look, I have an eye for talent. I know who's a good footballer and who's a bad footballer. Therefore, I can be an agent. I have met so-and-so at a social gathering and we discuss football. I can be a football agent. But what people then forget to realize is it's a whole complex business, which sometimes I say is probably much easier for me as a lawyer, because I just say the law says, and that's what I stick with. But as a football agent, you now need to try and weigh the opportunities for your client, how best to improve. And you're not only focusing on getting them an employment contract, and that's the end, considering their short careers, you want to commercialize or monetize all sorts of other aspects. Sometimes they come to you and tell you that the coach doesn't like me, they're depressed, and all, you play psychologist and all those things. And I think that's where the biggest weakness for most of, especially young upcoming agents, they want to do everything. And I don't think it's possible. As a starting point, you need to assess your strength in all these myriad of factors that an agent must possess, or qualities they must possess. Where you don't have the skills, you need to seek the proper advice. Some aspects relate to finance. You're not a financial advisor, work with a financial advisor. Some mental health issues, work with the trained people. Some are legal issues, unless if you understand the law yourself, seek advice, because once you have that wholesome understanding of the business, it's not easy for an agency that comes from whatever place you can pick that is well established to come and hoodwink you into doing some of these deals, especially where some people genuinely believe that they are collaborating with an agency in Madrid or in Liverpool. Their youngster is going to go there, and at the end of the day, they get changed themselves as an agent, and the youngster goes there, but they don't really understand what happens there. When we look at it from our perspective, we never dealt with that guy from Madrid or from Liverpool. As a parent or as a local club here in my village or in my town, I dealt with you. So all the misfortunes that befall the player, we say it was your agency that led into that. So it's important that people really understand their strengths. Where they don't understand or they don't have skills, they then have to seek the appropriate advice. And probably the biggest shortfall is this issue of regulatory issues or the law, because sometimes some people, when you sit in a meeting with some people and you explain that, but you can't do that, they actually are surprised. They open their eyes wide open that there's actually a law for this. You're like, yes, you can't masquerade as you're trying to transfer a minor and under 18 chap, unless if you are one of those exceptions, as Louis has pointed out. But you would have an agency busy promising you he's very good. In many years, he'll be good. But like, no, but he's only 15. He can't go anywhere. No, I'm sure we can do something. And sometimes it's genuine ignorance or the excitement that I just want to get the deal done, and not because I'm being greedy or it's just a lack of understanding. So educate yourself, understand your weaknesses, seek appropriate help. And on the other hand as well, yes, this might not really be directed at agents, but it's also, and I'm glad Louis touched on that there will be these programs directed at players and parents to educate them, because sometimes some of these agents are under pressure from parents, because they see their son as their ticket out of the hardships they are going through, and they force the agent, look, my son belongs to Madrid, make everything possible to make him go there. And it's quite difficult. On the one hand, there's the temptation of the big bag that might come out of this. On the other hand, there's also this pressure from this desperate youngster or his desperate parents. So education on that aspect as well would, in my view, be very important. And I'm glad FIFA is looking into that aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think education is the foundation of this entire sector. There's so much misinformation and misunderstanding around the sports law sector as a whole. And Farai, I know that you and I have had the opportunity to discuss this kind of thing on the Law in Sport platform, and I know that a lot of the people from Law in Sport are watching today as well. You also mentioned, Farai, exceptions to minors being able to move. Timothy Kaja, who's watching us on YouTube, good evening to you, Timothy. He's also mentioned one of the exceptions. I hope we're going to have time to get into that, because that's a very niche question with regards to refugees. So we'll try and get onto that. But Farai, your main point was focusing around competence, working with people that have got experience or understanding of specific issues, and ensuring that one is educated to be able to provide the appropriate service. And Luis also spoke about this with regards to what FIFA's view is moving forward, a holistic view to provide the ability to deliver continuing professional development to all of those involved in the sector. Now, it may be, Farai, that you agree with me. There are a number of agents that are operating in the market, but particularly in some of the less developed footballing economies, many of which do reside on the African continent. A number of these agents tend to focus on quick wins. Now, you mentioned that sometimes the family or the agent might see a certain player in their own mind as their ticket to fortune and fame. And this might be a reflection of the way the media portrays football in this day and age, when you speak about these huge transfer fees and these immense salaries that players receive on a weekly or monthly basis. And then the immediate interpolation that, a young lad from Nairobi all of a sudden is going to be able to necessarily find himself at Manchester United, or a young girl from Kinshasa is naturally going to find herself in Barcelona as the next step, without thinking about everything else that goes into it. So you mentioned all of the education, but what would you say, Farai, in terms of your view, would be the immediate next steps for the industry to move forward and more towards management of the athlete, as opposed to the current quick win mentality and transactional nature that it currently has? And then, Luis, if you wouldn't mind, I'll invite you to answer that from a regulatory perspective as well.
Thanks, Dave. I think part of the steps, in addition to education, is yes, previously or even now, and Louis can explain these things better than me. there was this emphasis of you can only practice as an individual, as an agency, and not really as a group or company with one person at the top being responsible, that sort of thing. So that sort of plays, in all fairness to the agents, almost like a barrier in terms of collaborating on areas that people have different skills and they can complement each other. So if I'm good at law and you're good at finance and someone else is good at talent scouting or recruitment, we can easily form a full service agency where all these issues are dealt with, and rather than specifically focusing on a footballer needs to earn a salary, therefore I must just get him an employment contract, and that's the end. There is no, for lack of a better term, is add-on services or where there's constant monitoring of what's happening. Most of them come back after 3 years or 4 years when the contract expires. They renew and then they disappear. So it's these added services that will probably and that require different skill sets. That if people are really to make good inroads or progress, you probably want to start working towards that. That we are fully fledged agency. We can help you with intellectual property issues. We can help you monetize your brand. We can help you get endorsements and all. But in my experience, what I've noticed is that the contract or the player agent agreement would say the duties of the agent, securing the player's transfer and registration and so forth. Then when it comes to all these other added services, it says at the request of the player. And you can see the onus is being shifted to, but if the player doesn't request, I don't have to do those things. And I don't think that's a good practice if an agency is to thrive, because those are areas that you probably should be also focusing on. There's so much competition out there, and you need certain things that set you apart. And before I let Louis comment, I just want to go back to Jabu's question, which I didn't by any chance try to escape it. I see Jabu asked the question of the issue of caps. I will not be, probably Louis will be more versed on the issue of the cap. But I'll comment generally that I think a cap is necessary in the sense that it's quite easy for a guy who transferred one player from Barcelona to PSG for multi-millions. His 3% is probably 30 million or 3 million pounds. So that cap, in as much as there's room to get more for that person, whether it's 3% or 10%, it's still a lot of money, and the temptation of these devious practices is reduced in my sense. But if you then have a guy who's going to transfer Farai, who's fresh out of an academy, doesn't know anything, and the transfer or the deal for Farai is only £100, how do I make much more out of the £100? I then demand 40% off that, because then that's the only way I can make. So the absence of caps will probably be to the detriment of young stars and upcoming that are not in the limelight, where people would want to push the envelope, as it were, to try and make as much as possible from those youngsters. But I think if I'm not mistaken, Jabu is probably from South Africa, Jabu Mtwa. You would remember there was also that controversy, I think in 2017, with this issue of these caps and the agents, where it was quite a funny twist of events. So basically, when SAFA tried to follow the recommendation of the 3% and say it will be kept, the agents then viewed that as anti-competitive behavior. So they referred a case to the Competition Commission. But in a strange twist of events, after the investigation, the Competition Commission then recommended that the agents themselves be prosecuted for collusion, because they were now saying by them agreeing to charge 10% and all that, they have price fixed. and some of them ended up even entering into plea bargains with the competition commission. So you can see that it's a hot topic that if it didn't mean much, there wouldn't be all these fights and trying to remove it or trying to resist it.
That's an interesting perspective, Farai. That's a very interesting perspective, and I think Luis, maybe you'll have your own views on this as well. So, in fact, because we are now focusing a little bit more on the question that was put forward by Jabu Ntwa, maybe we could go in reverse order, and Luis, we could invite you to make a response to the point of the cap before talking in more general terms about the point Farai made previously.
Yes, definitely. I think our main target is to answer the questions that are raised by the audience. And first, thank you for putting those questions, because I think it's relevant to explain also within the African continent what we also want to do. And it's indeed, FIFA is proposing to introduce universal cap, so cap apply worldwide, like the map I have down there. So we're regulating worldwide as a world governing body. And I agree that sometimes that's the main challenge, because of course, if we say 3% within the European standards, people would say, I think it's reasonable. But probably if you go not only to Africa, but other smaller, less developed football countries in that sense, probably it's not enough. But as rightly said by Farai, the issue is like when you have lower salaries, the higher the cap. And we need to protect those young players that earn not enough, and to allow them to have a decent salary. That's one of our objectives, to protect those young players. So we move from a recommendation, which currently is in the intermediate regulations, to impose a cap of 3% on the player's salary if you act on behalf of the player, but also a 3% if you act on behalf of the engaging club, while a 10% if you are a football agent acts on behalf of the releasing club. So it's not a recommendation, and it's something that FIFA wish to impose. I know it's a big challenge, but that's why we're here. Like I said, I think before, this is not a popularity contest. Is something that we need to do to fix the market and try to address the market failures that we identified. And one of them is exactly what Farai said. Players with lower salaries have higher caps. Have a higher commission. So this needs to be fixed to protect those young players.
No, well, thank you very much for that, Luis. And as you said, it's not a popularity contest, and I understand that the perspective that FIFA holds is one that is being contested by many around the world. But from a regulator's perspective, in those terms, invariably, it's something that needs to be maintained, and you've got to have that sanctity therein. Now, talking about the caps, and you've both put forward in quite an erudite way your own perspective, or Farai, you've put forward your own perspective. Luis, maybe I'll say you've put forward FIFA's perspective on how to speak about it. We've actually got another question which nicely piggybacks onto Jabu's question. It's from Farai, our good friend Kelvin Omojine from Nigeria, and Kelvin's speaking about the fine line between the player agent and the intermediary and the player manager with regards to the scope of activities. I'm presuming, Kelvin, is what you're referring to. Now, if we speak about the cap alone, as Farai mentioned, in order for the agent or the intermediary or the manager, let's say, to be able to earn an amount that justifies, in their view, the work that they've put in, they would often try to claim a larger percentage from what tends to be a smaller salary, where it tends to be the reverse, the other way around for larger transfers and larger salaries, because 3% of multi-millions is still a hell of a lot of money, as opposed to doing it for a few dollars or a few euros. However, when we talk about the cap, and I think Luis will agree with me, we're talking about a cap or a recommendation that is being placed on monetization of the transfer of the registration of a football player, or the salary that is denoted from the football player's registration with X or Y club. It's not something that relates to any other commercial activity that the manager would often incur or engage in on behalf of his or her clients. So I think, Kelvin, you've touched a nice point there. I know Farai mentioned it earlier with regards to having your IP consultant or your mental health consultant or your fitness consultant and so on and so forth. But I think the line often is that a player agent and intermediary may, if we define it as such, may be focusing solely on the football activity, whereas the manager would focus not only on the football activity, but all of the peripheral activity around it as well, which can generate income both for the player and for the manager, his or herself. So I think there are certain things that we've got to add and qualify here. Where caps are being spoken of, those caps are only on a very linear process that FIFA has the ability to govern. It's not something that can be imposed on any Nike or Adidas or Homa deal that is made for a player. And these are things that sometimes tend to be lost in all of the arguments between different stakeholders and FIFA. So, Luis, I hope I'm protecting you and FIFA enough with that statement, but that's as far as I'll be able to go. And Kelvin, I hope I've also piggybacked on your comment to your satisfaction. Gentlemen, we've got a very specific query. We've got loads of queries, and again, thank you to the members of the audience for interacting with us today on a topic that we could really talk about for several more hours. But Luis, if you wouldn't mind, before we start the wrap-ups, because we've only got a few minutes left, Timothy Kaja did put forward a very specific question a little while ago with regards to refugees. Now, I hope that I don't put you on the spot, because this is quite a niche area. But Timothy does highlight that there is now an increasing trend of recruiting talent from camps of forced migrants. And how can agents lawfully relate with such talents? Now, Farai had indirectly touched upon this earlier when he spoke about exceptions for transfers of minors. But Luis, if you wouldn't mind, if you're able to, and if you're happy to do so, if you could kindly expand upon why this would fall into one of those exceptions on the face of it.
Well, I think it goes beyond the FIFA football agents regulations, in my personal opinion, and I don't want to step in someone else's shoes, but this is, I guess, it will be one of the topics that will be touched upon on the new transfer system reform related to minors. I think refugees is part of the discussion that will happen soon, hopefully. And of course, whatever comes up from this discussion with the game stakeholders, definitely agencies need to obey. At the moment, what we have, it's the regulations related to the minors themselves, whether related to refugees or not. It's something that is not covered. But hopefully, with this discussion that the task force will have soon, there will be some news related to that. So pay attention on the relevant FIFA channels. That will be hopefully news on this field.
Oh, thank you very much, Luis, for a very diplomatic answer. But certainly, I'm sure a lot of people will be paying attention to that. The same way I'm sure a lot of people paid attention to the commentary that was expertly held by the FIFA player status team yesterday, which was live, and I think it can still be seen on YouTube over and over again, much like all of the episodes of the African Football Business Show that can be seen on YouTube after this recording has finished. So I think it's time to wrap up. Slowly. I did say right at the beginning that we'll discuss some of the points of the status quo, as well as some points with regards to how we can move forward. And what I would like to do, just after I've posed one final question to Farai that is specifically put to him by Evert de Bruijn, I would invite both gentlemen to put forward their final comments. I know we've spoken about education, continuous professional development, competence, but I'd invite you both to put forward your comments on how we can see the industry progressing and moving forward, and how we could assist the development of the ecosystem ourselves. But before doing that, Farai, I'll invite you to start first. But before going into that, Mr. De Bruijn has asked you who you feel is going to win tonight in the South Africa versus Zimbabwe match. I'm not going to enter into this terse discussion, so I'll leave that controversial question with you.
Well, Mr. De Bruijn is a good friend of mine and colleague, but I think he's being naughty. He knows I'm conflicted here. The conflict of interest being South Africa has been nice to me, provided shelter for me. That's where I live. Zimbabwe, I was born there, and he wants me to choose one. So I think the best way to do so is to just say the best team will win tonight.
Well, as spoken by a true sportsman, Farai. So thank you very much for answering that on behalf of Evert. And if you could kindly provide all of our audience around the world with your final comments on this session.
Thanks, Dave. I think I don't want to regurgitate what Louis has aptly put. I think, but maybe before I get to Louis, the primary thing, and I cannot stress this more than enough, it's education, because some things get lost in the washing because people just don't understand their obligations. There are those that are naughty and deliberately ignore their obligations, always trying to push the envelope. As lawyers, they say the good lawyer knows the rules, but the best lawyer knows the exceptions. There are sort of those things where everyone is always trying to go for the exceptions, and in that mix, things get out of control. So there needs to be a clear, the eyes must always be on those things. This tendency of trying to push the boundaries as much as possible, it needs to be guarded against, especially when people are dealing with minors who, of course, it's beyond the scope of this discussion, but Louis touched on the issue of trafficking that happens internationally. Even within certain countries, there's also a lot of trafficking that happens locally, kids coming from rural areas into the cities and abandoned, and people need to be careful on that. From a regulatory perspective, I think Louis hit it on the nail that the issue of enforcement becomes also very important, because there is no point in having all these regulations that are the best and so forth, but there's no one enforcing them on the ground, because then they just are useless. They are of no value to anyone. And people always ask in a funny way that if the government expects everyone to obey the law and is confident that it will enforce the law, why does it build jails? And because they know there are some that will still not obey the law. So yes, there will always be those few that will not obey the rules, but enforcement is very important.
Oh, excellent! Thank you very much for that, Farah. And I think that's something that Luis, you'll probably touch upon with the new regulations when they do come out. I think that will be one of the key things, really, having the ability for people to take forward an issue or a dispute or a complaint and have that enforced, certainly within the remit of FIFA, without going ultra vires and stepping out into things that it cannot do. but enforcing it within the remit and applying a regulatory system, much like it does for many of the other routes under FIFA jurisdictions, which work extremely well, in my opinion, particularly with the new FIFA administration. So, Luis, if you wouldn't mind, just your final comments on this entire topic.
Yeah, sure. Just I know the question was not to me about the result, but I hope South Africa wins because I have a big close friend in Cape Town, Luke Duplessis, and I hope I'm rooting for him because I have friends there, and I hope they win. And congratulations to Luke because he's just become a dad 2 weeks ago. But answer to your question, I think honestly, we're just trying to create a better system. Whether we will manage to do that, we hopefully do. And I know there are a lot of criticisms, which I think it's good because it means that we're doing something in the benefit for the game. And if we were promoting or implementing a new football agent framework without criticism, I would be worried, honestly, because it means that we are doing something to improve the game. And the biggest challenge, of course, to have all stakeholders plus agents agreed on the regulations. That's the most challenging thing. But probably from some provisions, FIFA will be more happy, ECA for others, agents others. So at the end, I just hope to bring more sanity to the transfer system at the end, and hopefully we'll do that in the short term. That's our objective. But yeah, let's see. Let's just stay tuned and to see if we're doing the right thing.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Luis, and we're all looking forward to the new iteration of the regulations as to when it comes out. So we within the sports law sector, and of course many of our friends and clients who work as agents, intermediaries, Farai, I'm sure you'll agree or concur that we're all wishing you the best in what is a monumentous task. It's not, as you mentioned, going to be without criticism. That comes with the responsibility that you've taken, Luis, you and your team. But we wish you the best for when they are released, and hopefully it does improve the current situation. And Farai, of course, thank you again for all the work that you're doing in this sector. The buzzword that you keep using, and it's something that I've done exactly the same, is education, education, education within this sector. And I hope that you are steadfast in your journey where you continue to spread this message. And I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more agents and intermediaries developing themselves and on the African continent and improving the ecosystem. So I thank you both for your time today, gentlemen. It's been an absolute honor to have you here. Two of the big names in our industry, and we've got them on the same table. So thank you again on behalf of the Football Foundation for Africa. We're going to be wrapping up, ladies and gentlemen, members of the audience. Thank you all for your attendance today. Of course, if there's anything that you want to go over again, this show is going to be recorded and you can catch it on YouTube for as long as you desire once this show is uploaded at the end of this session. Now, next week's show, first of all, you'll be pleased to hear that I will not be hosting it. We will go back to our CEO, Farai Razano, who's a far more decorated presenter than I, and he will be covering the topic of entrepreneurship and innovation in football. The poster is up on our screens right now, and we do have special guests from Brazil and Zimbabwe, which has been mentioned today. So I'm hoping for that reason alone that Zimbabwe win, so that Kupakwashe Mukurumbita is Mukurumbira, I should say, is happy with the results when he comes onto the panel. And we've got Professor Maureen Flores, who will both be discussing this topic with Mr. Wesala next week. Nothing left to do apart from thanking you all again for your time wherever you are in the world. My name's Dev Kumar Palmer. I've been your host today, and wishing you the best for the rest of the day, and look forward to seeing you on the next Africa Football Business Show. Thank you very much.